There. I want to read to you a short passage from Luke's Gospel, chapter 14, and I'm starting at verse 7 here. Jesus is eating in the house of some of the Pharisees. They've shared their meal together, and we pick up the account then. When Jesus noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, "Give this person your seat." And humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, "Friend, move up to a better place." Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Christians and the church in general has always had a problematic relationship with power and authority and influence. We see it in all sorts of ways. We live in a country here in South Africa where the church is recognized as a body of significant influence. And in our public gatherings on the civic level, there are often prayers and references to the Christian faith. We see it in other ways too, when a public figure or a celebrity or a politician talks openly about their Christian faith. Many of us as Christians celebrate that. It seems we are always keen to see our faith in the public eye and in positions of influence. And in many ways that's understandable, because we want the faith that is so precious to us to be exerting a positive influence on society and to be being talked about, so that those who disdain our faith and are cynical about it can see it perhaps in a better light. But it's also true that Jesus seems very, very clear that worldly power is not something to be sought, that influence is not something to be looked for its own sake. That parable that he tells very starkly in the Pharisee's house upends the human instinct to look for promotion and advancement and influence and power. I was reflecting on this as we started thinking about what lies ahead for us as we move into the future together as individuals and as a church at St. Peter's. We're starting to talk about what from the past we take with us into what is next, and what we reshape and remake. And to be doing that, we're starting to look at the story of Abraham on Sundays. And it's very easy to think of this new reality in terms of our influence and our power. We want the faith to be transformative on ourselves and on the area and the city and the country which we call home. But far be it from us to look to be influencers. Do we, as churches and as Christians, crave the seat of privilege and power and influence? Do we, as Christians, seek to serve and bless society, even if we don't get things our way, the Christian way, or at least what we think is the Christian way? There's a truth that seems almost universal throughout church Christian history, that we see most conversions and rapid growth of sincere and passionate faith when the church is persecuted, not when it's in a position of power or societal influence. So in this new future that we're seeking to discern and understand together, do we seek for influence and power, or do we seek to be those who serve? Our church building at St. Peter's is a is powerful in the sense that in the area pretty much everyone can see it and people know where it is. But do we use that noticeable character that we have in terms of our building to be a place that serves or to be a place that influences, that is powerful? The microsite that we're running at the moment for people who have nowhere else to go during the lockdown is, I hope, an act of service from us to the least in society. It's not an exploitation of power. Where we have, as individuals or as a church, power and authority, or a seat at the table of privilege, it should only really, it seems from the model of Jesus here in Luke's Gospel, be something we use for the sake of seeking to overturn societal norms for the benefit of the least, and not to shape society necessarily in our own image, but only in the service of those who are in most need. As someone once said, the purpose of power is to give it away. And our model is Jesus. As I've said many times before, a very significant passage to me comes from that great hymn in the middle of Philippians chapter 2, where we read about Jesus being one who is entitled to so much power, and yet in service of those who were most needy, us, all, he divested himself of that power. He gave up that power that we might know him. So what does that leave us with? It leaves us as being those, I think, who critique the power that we each have as individuals and that we institutionally have as a church at St. Peter's and as a larger church body across the nation. And ask ourselves, the power, the authority, the influence that we have, do we use it in service or do we use it to promote ourselves and our agendas? It's a question to shape us and to keep asking us as we go into this future together. So may we at St. Peter's be those who think of ourselves the way Christ Jesus thought of himself, who had equal status with God but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status. That when the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a slave, becoming human. Having become human, he stayed human. He didn't claim special privileges. He lived a selfless, obedient life and died a selfless, obedient death. And because of that obedience, God lifted him high and honoured him far beyond anyone or anything, so that all created beings in heaven and on earth, even those long ago dead and buried, will bow in worship before this same Jesus Christ and call out in praise that he is the master of all, to the glorious honour of God the Father. May we have this Jesus as our model. Amen.